The massive alien ship hung in space like a metal mountain. Its dark hull stretched for miles, covered in strange symbols that glowed with blue light. Inside the ship's command center, Fleet Admiral Vextar studied the data screens with cold yellow eyes. His 6 arms moved across the controls while his reptilian face showed no emotion. "Report on the new species," he commanded in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. A smaller alien scurried forward, its insect-like body trembling. "The planet is called Earth, Admiral. They have just learned to travel between stars. Their technology is very basic. They should be easy to control." Vextar nodded slowly. In his 1,000 years of service to the galactic hegemony, he had conquered 47 species. Earth would be number 48. The pattern was always the same. First came the demand for tribute. Most species surrendered quickly when they saw the size of his fleet. Those who resisted were crushed within days. "Send the standard message," Vextar ordered. "Tell them they have 30 days to decide." On Earth, President Hyun-woo Kim sat in the emergency meeting room deep under the White House. The room was packed with world leaders, military officials, and scientists. All eyes were fixed on the large screen at the front of the room. The holographic image showed a tall, thin alien with gray skin and large black eyes. "Greetings, primitive species of Sol 3, the alien spoke in perfect English, though its voice was flat and emotionless. "I am Imperial Legate Korthvin of the Galactic Hegemony. Your world has been selected for integration into our empire." Dr. Jamin Park, Earth's top alien expert, leaned forward in his chair. He had spent years preparing for this moment, but nothing could have readied him for the alien's next words. "Your tribute requirements are simple," Korthvin continued. "Each year you will provide 40% of your planet's resources. 30% of your population will serve as workers in our colonies. You will share all technology and weapons with the hegemony. In return, we will protect you from other threats in the galaxy." The room erupted in angry voices. President Kim raised his hand for silence, but the alien was not finished speaking. "Do not waste time with the usual resistance phase," Korthvin said with what might have been a smile. "We have made this offer to 137 species. All have accepted eventually. You have 30 solar rotations to give us your answer." The hologram disappeared, leaving the room in shocked silence. Admiral Sora Lee, commander of Earth's small space fleet, was the first to speak. 30% of our population? That's over 2 billion people. "They're talking about slavery," said Min-ho Choi, a former Special Forces soldier who now worked as a military analyst. "This isn't a trade deal. It's conquest." President Kim looked around the room at the faces of world leaders. Fear, anger, and determination mixed in their expressions. "Dr. Park, what do we know about this hegemony?" The scientist pulled up files on his tablet. "We've been monitoring their communications for the past week. From what we can tell, they control most of this part of the galaxy. They have thousands of worlds under their rule." "How do they treat the species they conquer?" asked the president of Russia. Dr. Park's face grew dark. "Based on their own records, not well. Most conquered species are used as slave labor until they die out. Their cultures are destroyed, their histories erased. After a few generations, it's like they never existed." The room fell silent again. Everyone understood what this meant. If Earth surrendered, humanity would eventually disappear. General Sung-ho Nam, head of the Global Defense Council, stood up. "Mr. President, we need to know more about their military capabilities." "Min-ho, what did your team find?" Min-ho activated a wall screen showing technical data. "Their ships are huge and heavily armed, but they rely on energy shields for protection. Their weapons are powerful but slow to charge. Most importantly, they seem to follow very rigid tactics. Every battle we've seen in their records follows the same pattern." "What kind of pattern?" President Kim asked. "They expect enemies to defend their home worlds," Min-ho explained. "They've never faced an enemy that attacks first or uses unconventional tactics. Every species they've conquered has tried to negotiate or hide behind defenses." Admiral Lee nodded slowly. "You're suggesting we don't follow their script?" "Exactly," Min-ho said. "They expect us to act like all the others. But we're not like the others." President Kim stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the lights of Washington, D.C. In a few hours, he would have to address the world. Humanity's future would depend on his words. "Gentlemen and ladies," he said finally, turning back to the room, "we need to be very clear about our situation. This hegemony has conquered over 100 species. They have thousands of ships and weapons we can barely understand. By every logical measure, we should surrender. Murmurs of worry filled the room, but the president continued. However, logic is not humanity's greatest strength. Our greatest strength is something this hegemony has never encountered before. We do not surrender. We do not submit. When someone threatens our freedom, we fight back, even if the odds are impossible. Dr. Park looked up from his files. Mr. President, their fleet will arrive in 6 months. We need to decide quickly what we're going to do. President Kim smiled, and for the first time since the alien message, some of the fear left the room. "Oh, I know exactly what we're going to do," he said. "We're going to send them a message they'll never forget." 2 hours later, President Kim stood before cameras that would broadcast his words to every human on Earth and beyond. His message would be transmitted on the same frequency the aliens had used, ensuring they would hear humanity's response. "Citizens of Earth and representatives of the galactic hegemony," he began, his voice calm but firm. "Today we received a demand for tribute from an alien empire. They want our resources, our people, and our freedom. They expect us to surrender like all the others." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Our answer is simple. We do not negotiate with slavers. We do not bargain with tyrants. And we certainly do not surrender to bullies who threaten innocent people." His voice grew stronger with each word. "To the galactic hegemony, we send this message. You picked the wrong species. You chose the wrong planet. And you made the wrong threat. We suggest you turn your ships around and flee while you still can. Because humanity is coming and we are very, very angry." 3 days after President Kim's broadcast, Earth transformed into something the galaxy had never seen before. Every nation put aside old arguments and worked together with a single purpose. General Sung Ho Nam stood in the new Global Command Center, watching screens that showed activity all around the world. "Report from Section 1, called out Major Hee-jin Park from her station. "All major cities are being evacuated to underground shelters," she said. "Construction teams are working around the clock. We should have room for 2 billion people within 4 months. General Nam nodded. While other species had tried to negotiate with the hegemony, humanity was preparing for the worst possible war. Every person on Earth knew their life depended on the next 6 months. Dr. Yoon-ji Han barely slept anymore. She ran Project Prometheus, Earth's crash program, to develop new weapons. Her team of 3,000 scientists worked in underground labs built in just 2 weeks. They had taken humanity's most dangerous theoretical ideas and tried to make them real. "The quantum bombs are ready for testing," reported her assistant, Dr. Ki-Woo Lim. "But we're still not sure they'll work in space." "They'll work," Dr. Han said firmly. "They have to work." The quantum bombs used principles that most species considered too dangerous to research. They could tear holes in space itself, creating explosions more powerful than nuclear weapons. The hegemony had never seen anything like them, because most civilized species were too afraid to build them. Captain Dong-Hyun Ko commanded the construction of Luna Base Alpha on the moon. Thousands of workers and robots labored day and night to build humanity's first line of defense. The base would house 50,000 soldiers and enough weapons to destroy a small fleet. "Sir, we've completed the main gun batteries," reported Lieutenant Myung-Soo Yoon. "Each one can punch through a hegemony cruiser's shields with a single shot." Captain Ko watched the workers installing the massive railguns. The weapons fired metal slugs at nearly the speed of light. They required enormous amounts of power, but Earth had built fusion reactors specifically for this purpose. "What about the surprise packages?" Captain Ko asked. Lieutenant Yoon grinned. "All installed, sir. The aliens won't know what hit them." On Earth, engineer Yoo-jin Baek revolutionized human ship design in just 4 months. Traditional human ships were small and lightly armed. The new designs were different. They were still small, but they carried weapons and equipment no alien would expect. "The stealth systems are working perfectly," she told Admiral Lee during a test flight. "Our ships are invisible to hegemony sensors until they're close enough to attack." The stealth technology used quantum field manipulation to bend light around human ships. It required massive amounts of energy, but it only needed to work for short periods, long enough for human ships to get close to their targets. But humanity's most important weapon was being developed by Strategic Communications Director Woo-jin Ryu. His team called it the Message, and it was more dangerous than any bomb. "The virus program is complete," he reported to President Kim. Once it enters their communication network, it will spread to every hegemony ship and planet within weeks. What exactly will it do? The president asked. It will show them the truth, Wu Jin replied. Every species the hegemony has destroyed, every crime they've committed, every lie they've told their own people. But more importantly, it will show them how to fight back. The message contained complete technical specifications for countering hegemony weapons and shields. It included battle plans, weaknesses in their ship designs, and psychological profiles of their commanders. Most importantly, it carried proof that the hegemony could be defeated. Dr. Haiwan Seo made the breakthrough that would change everything. Her team had been working on quantum communication systems that could send messages instantly across any distance. We've established contact with the colony ships, she announced to the Global Command Center. Everyone turned to stare at her. The colony ships were humanity's most secret project. While the world focused on preparing for war, 10,000 volunteers had left Earth in experimental ships. They were heading for distant star systems, carrying everything needed to rebuild human civilization. How many made it safely? President Kim asked. All 15 colony fleets have reached their destinations, Dr. Seo replied. They're already beginning construction of new settlements. Even if Earth falls, humanity will survive. Colonel Insu Jiang finished preparing the resistance protocol. If the planet was invaded, humanity would not surrender. Every city had hidden weapons caches. Every citizen knew how to fight. The aliens might conquer Earth, but they would pay a terrible price for it. The deep shelters are stocked with supplies for 10 years, he reported. We have enough weapons to arm 50 million guerrilla fighters. If they want our planet, they'll have to dig us out piece by piece. As the months passed, humanity's preparations grew more impressive. The asteroid belt was filled with automated weapons platforms. Jupiter's moons had been turned into military bases. Saturn's rings hid thousands of attack drones. Mars became a massive weapons factory. But the most terrifying weapon was kept secret from everyone except a small group of leaders. Dr. Yoon Ji, Han's final project, was so dangerous that just building it could destroy the solar system. The stellar manipulation array is complete, she told President Kim in a private meeting. We can destabilize the sun and create a gamma-ray burst that will sterilize 50 light-years of space. President Kim stared at the data. You're talking about suicide on a cosmic scale. Yes, sir, Dr. Han replied calmly. But it will also destroy any hegemony fleet in the area. If we can't be free, at least we can make sure our enemies don't survive either. 5 months after the alien ultimatum, long-range sensors detected the approaching hegemony fleet. 200 massive ships were heading toward Earth at faster-than-light speed. They would arrive in 30 days. Admiral Lee called a final meeting of all military commanders. The room was filled with the best and brightest officers humanity had to offer. Every one of them knew they were facing impossible odds. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Lee began, in 30 days, we face the largest military force in galactic history. They have more ships, bigger weapons, and thousands of years of experience. By any reasonable measure, we should lose this war. She paused and looked around the room. Fortunately, humanity has never been reasonable. We've prepared surprises that will shock the galaxy. Our enemies expect us to defend our world like every other species they've conquered. Instead, we're going to attack them with everything we have. Captain Taeho An, pilot of the stealth frigate Soul's Fury, raised his hand. Admiral, what are our orders when the shooting starts? Admiral Lee's smile was cold and determined. Simple, Captain. We're going to show the galactic hegemony why you should never threaten a human's family. We're going to hit them so hard that every species in the galaxy will hear about it. And we're going to make sure they regret the day they decided to pick a fight with Earth. The room erupted in cheers. In 30 days, the war would begin. But for the first time in months, humanity felt ready. Fleet Admiral Vextar studied the tactical display with growing confusion. His massive fleet had arrived at the edge of the Sol system, expecting to find the humans cowering behind their planet's defenses. Instead, his sensors showed something impossible. The humans were attacking. Admiral, his communications officer called out in panic. 3 of our scout ships just disappeared. Disappeared? Vextar's four eyes narrowed. Explain. They were there one moment, then gone the next. No debris, no energy signatures. They just vanished. Before Vextar could respond, his tactical officer screamed, "Incoming missiles!" Hundreds of them. The hegemony fleet's massive shields flared to life. But the human missiles were different from anything they had encountered. Instead of exploding against the shields, they passed right through them and struck the ship's hulls directly. How is this possible? Vextar roared. No primitive species has shield penetration technology. On the bridge of the Earth defense ship Busan's Pride, Admiral Sora Lee watched the first wave of attacks with satisfaction. The quantum phase missiles had worked perfectly, slipping through the aliens' shields like they weren't there. First blood to humanity, she announced to her crew. Now let's show them what we really can do. The human fleet emerged from stealth positions throughout the solar system. Unlike the massive, slow hegemony ships, the human vessels were small, fast, and incredibly maneuverable. They moved like angry wasps around the alien fleet, attacking from all directions at once. Captain Tae-Ho-An piloted his stealth frigate Soul's Fury through the chaos of battle. His ship was barely 100 meters long, a tiny speck compared to the kilometer-long alien cruisers. But it carried enough firepower to destroy ships 50 times its size. Target their command towers, he ordered his weapons officer. Let's cut off their heads. The frigate's main gun fired a stream of antimatter particles that carved through the alien ship's armor like a knife through paper. The enemy cruiser's command section exploded in a brilliant flash, leaving the massive vessel spinning helplessly in space. But Captain An wasn't finished. He flew his ship directly toward another alien vessel, activating the Soul's Fury's most deadly weapon, its ramming prow. The front of the ship was lined with quantum explosives that would detonate on impact. "Sir, you're on a collision course," his navigator called out. "I know exactly what I'm doing," An replied calmly. "For Earth." The Soul's Fury struck the alien ship at nearly the speed of light. The quantum explosives detonated, creating a brief but incredibly powerful explosion that vaporized both ships instantly. The energy release was so intense that it damaged 3 other alien vessels nearby. Across the battle zone, similar scenes played out as human ships threw themselves at their enemies with suicidal fury. The aliens had never encountered anything like it. Every species they had conquered had tried to preserve their forces, fighting defensively and hoping for mercy. The humans fought like they didn't care if they died as long as they took aliens with them. Commander Bo Young Lim commanded the destroyer Incheon's Wrath when 3 alien battleships surrounded her vessel. Her ship was damaged and outgunned, but she didn't consider retreat. "All hands, prepare for Protocol 0, she announced over the ship's communication system. Her crew responded without hesitation. They had all volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not return home. Protocol 0 meant deliberately overloading the ship's reactor core to create a massive explosion. "It's been an honor serving with you all," Commander Lim said as she initiated the overload sequence. The Incheon's Wrath exploded with the force of a small star. The blast vaporized all 3 alien ships and created an expanding sphere of destruction 50 kilometers across. The explosion was so bright it could be seen from Earth's surface. Fleet Admiral Vextar watched his fleet being torn apart by these insane humans and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. In 1,000 years of conquest, no enemy had ever willingly destroyed themselves just to damage his forces. "Order all ships to fall back to defensive formation," he commanded. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human planet," his communications officer reported. "Put it on screen," Vextar growled. The image of Strategic Communications Director Woo Jin Ryu appeared on the tactical display. He was smiling, which somehow made him more terrifying than if he had been angry. "Greetings, Fleet Admiral," Woo Jin said politely. "We hope you're enjoying your visit to our solar system. We've prepared some special entertainment for you." As he spoke, the human transmission began flooding the hegemony's communication networks. This was the message, the information weapon that Woo Jin's team had spent months developing. Within seconds, every hegemony ship was receiving detailed information about their empire's crimes. Images of destroyed worlds, records of genocide, proof of systematic slavery. All of it flooded their screens. But worse than the historical data was what came next. The message contained complete tactical analysis of hegemony military doctrine, weakness profiles of their ships and weapons, and detailed battle plans for defeating their forces. Most shocking of all, It included evidence that the hegemony's own soldiers were starting to question their orders. On the bridge of the hegemony cruiser Domination's Edge, Sub-Commander Thexenel stared at his screens in horror. The human transmission was showing him things his own government had hidden for centuries. Entire species wiped out for refusing to surrender. Planets strip-mined until they were lifeless rocks. Children taken from their families and sold into slavery. "Is this true?" he whispered to his tactical officer. The junior officer couldn't meet his eyes. I think so, sir." Similar scenes were playing out on ships throughout the hegemony fleet. Soldiers who had believed they were bringing peace to the galaxy were learning the truth about their empire's real purpose. But the message wasn't just aimed at the hegemony forces. It was being broadcast on all known frequencies, reaching every inhabited world in the local galactic region. On dozens of hegemony-controlled planets, oppressed species were learning that their oppressors could be defeated. President Hyunwoo Kim appeared on the communication channels, speaking directly to the alien fleet. "Soldiers of the hegemony," he said calmly, "you came here expecting to conquer another helpless world. Instead, you found something your empire has never faced before. A species that refuses to surrender." The president's image was replaced by footage from the battle. Human ships throwing themselves at alien vessels without regard for their own survival. Explosions that lit up space like new stars. And through it all, human voices broadcasting a single message: "We do not surrender." "You have a choice," President Kim continued. "You can continue following orders from leaders who see you as expendable tools, or you can remember what it means to be free." Fleet Admiral Vextar tried to cut off the human transmission, but it was too late. The message had already spread throughout his fleet's computer systems like a virus. Even worse, his long-range sensors were detecting something that made his blood freeze. The human attack wasn't random. While his forces were engaged in battle, more human ships had appeared throughout the solar system. They weren't trying to defend Earth. They were surrounding his entire fleet. "Admiral," his tactical officer called out in a voice filled with terror, "we're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system. The humans have turned their entire star system into a weapon." Vextar realized with growing horror that he had walked into a trap. The humans hadn't just prepared to defend their world. They had prepared to destroy anyone who threatened them, even if it meant sacrificing themselves in the process. For the first time in his long military career, Fleet Admiral Vextar began to consider the possibility that his mighty fleet might not survive this battle. Director Jae-sung Oh stood in the command center deep inside Cheyenne Mountain, his hands hovering over the controls that could end the war in minutes. Around him, dozens of technicians monitored screens showing energy readings from across the solar system. Project Sunfire was humanity's most terrible secret weapon. "All stations report ready," called out Lieutenant Colonel Minseo Kim. "Jupiter platforms are online. Saturn grid is active. Asteroid belt weapons are charged and targeting." Director O nodded grimly. The Sol defense grid had taken 4 months to build and represented the combined effort of every nation on Earth. Jupiter's moons had been converted into massive railgun platforms that could fire projectiles at 90% of light speed. Saturn's rings now contained 50,000 automated attack drones. The asteroid belt bristled with kinetic kill weapons powerful enough to crack planets. But all of that was nothing compared to what Dr. Yoonji Han had built. "Dr. Han, status on the stellar manipulation array?" Director O asked. Dr. Han looked up from her console, her face pale but determined. "All quantum field generators are in position and ready. We can destabilize the sun's core within 30 seconds of activation." The room fell silent. Every person there understood what that meant. If activated, the stellar manipulation array would cause their own sun to go supernova early, creating a gamma-ray burst that would sterilize everything within 50 light-years. It was a weapon so terrible that using it would mean the end of Earth, but it would also destroy the entire hegemony fleet. Fleet Admiral Vextar stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. His fleet of 200 mighty warships was surrounded by human weapons platforms that his scouts had somehow missed. Even worse, his communication systems were flooded with messages from his own crews questioning their orders. "Admiral," his communications officer reported with a shaking voice, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 ships in the outer formation." "Surrender?" Vextar's voice was barely controlled rage. "No hegemony ship has ever surrendered to a primitive species. Sir, they're saying the human broadcast has shown them things. Terrible things about what we've done to other worlds. Sub-Commander Thexneil stood on the bridge of his cruiser, watching the human message play on every screen. Images of destroyed cities, enslaved populations, and extinct species filled his view. His own government had hidden these crimes from the military, telling them they were liberating oppressed worlds. Contact Admiral Vextar, he ordered his communications officer. Request permission to open negotiations with the humans. Sir, the Admiral has ordered radio silence except for combat communications. Thexneil looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Fear, confusion, and growing anger showed in their expressions. They had believed they were the good guys. Now they were learning the truth about their empire. Then we'll make our own choice, he said quietly. President Hyunwoo Kim stood before the cameras in the Global Command Center, preparing to deliver humanity's final message to the galaxy. Behind him, screens showed the battle raging in space above Earth. Human ships continued to attack with desperate fury, trading their lives for alien vessels. Citizens of the galaxy, he began, his voice carrying across space on every available frequency. Today, humanity faces extinction at the hands of an empire that has destroyed over 100 species. They came to our world demanding tribute, expecting us to surrender like all the others. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But we are not like the others. We have shown the galaxy something it has never seen before. A species that would rather die free than live in chains. And we have prepared a demonstration that will echo across the stars for generations. Dr. Yoonji Han received the activation code and placed her hand on the quantum field controls. Around the solar system, massive generators began channeling energy directly into the sun's core. The star that had given life to Earth for billions of years could now be turned into a weapon of unimaginable power. Field generators at full power, she reported. Solar core destabilization in 60 seconds. The effect was immediately visible to every ship in the system. The sun began to pulse with an unnatural light, its surface erupting in massive flares that reached out like grasping fingers. Instruments throughout the hegemony fleet registered energy readings that should have been impossible. What are they doing? Fleet Admiral Vextar demanded. His science officer's voice cracked with terror. Admiral, they're destabilizing their own star. If they continue, it will go supernova. Vextar felt something that his species called ice blood, a fear so complete that it paralyzed rational thought. The humans weren't just willing to die to defeat him. They were willing to destroy their entire solar system, taking his fleet with them. Sub-Commander Thexneil made his decision. He opened a communication channel directly to the human fleet. Human ships. This is Sub-Commander Thexneil of the hegemony vessel Righteous. Fury, I request immediate negotiations for the withdrawal of my battle group from your system. The response came from Admiral Sorely herself. Sub-Commander, we appreciate your willingness to talk, but you need to understand something. We're not negotiating for our survival anymore. We're negotiating for yours. On 17 hegemony ships, similar conversations were taking place as alien crews realized their government had sent them to die for a lie. But Admiral Vextar and his hardline supporters refused to show weakness before a primitive species. All ships, ignore the human propaganda, Vextar broadcast to his fleet. Prepare for final assault on their planet. We will crush this rebellion and make an example of them. But nearly a quarter of his fleet refused the order. For the first time in hegemony history, their own ships turned their weapons on each other as moderates fought hardliners for control of the fleet. Director O watched the chaos through long-range sensors and made his own terrible decision. Dr. Han, abort the stellar destabilization sequence. Sir? She asked in confusion. We don't need to destroy the sun, he explained. Look at them. We've already won. On screens around the world, people watched as the mighty hegemony fleet tore itself apart. Ships that had come to conquer Earth were now fighting each other. Their crews split between loyalty to their empire and revulsion at its crimes. But the real victory was happening on dozens of worlds throughout hegemony space. The message had reached them all, carrying with it proof that their oppressors could be defeated. On the mining world of Ketha Prime, enslaved workers rose up and seized control of their overseers' weapons. In the Vega system, 3 subject species coordinated simultaneous attacks on hegemony military bases. President Kim's final broadcast was simple and direct. To all species throughout the galaxy, you are not alone. The empire that oppresses you can be defeated. We have shown you their weaknesses and given you the tools to fight back. The choice is yours. Fleet Admiral Vextar found himself commanding a fleet that was half the size it had been an hour ago. His remaining ships were surrounded by human weapons platforms and faced with the terrifying possibility that the humans might actually destabilize their sun. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "we're receiving reports from home space. Multiple rebellions have started on 17 worlds. The subject species are using human-designed weapons and tactics." Vextar realized with growing horror that he wasn't just facing a military defeat. He was watching the beginning of the end of his empire. A new voice came over the communication channels. Sub-Commander Thexanil had taken control of nearly 50 ships and was speaking to both the remaining hegemony forces and the humans. "I propose a truce," he announced. "My ships will withdraw immediately from this system. In exchange, the humans will allow safe passage to any hegemony vessel that chooses to leave." Admiral Lee's response was broadcast to both fleets. "Agreed, but understand this, Earth is now under human protection. Any ship that returns will be destroyed without warning." Fleet Admiral Vextar watched in rage and disbelief as his mighty fleet began to break apart. Some ships followed Thexanil's lead and requested safe passage home. Others tried to continue the attack and were destroyed by human weapons they couldn't even see. By the end of the day, only 37 hegemony ships remained to limp back to their home space, carrying with them news that would shake their empire to its foundations. The humans had done the impossible. They had defeated the galactic hegemony without destroying themselves. 1 year after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy was a very different place. Admiral Sora Lee stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, humanity's gift to the newly formed Galactic Liberation Council. Through the massive windows, she could see ships from 37 different species docked at the station's ports. They had all come to attend the first free assembly of galactic civilizations in over 10,000 years. "The Ketha delegates have arrived," reported Captain Dong Hyun Ko, now serving as the station's military commander. "They're requesting permission to present the human delegation with a gift." Admiral Lee smiled. The Ketha were former slaves who had used human-designed weapons to overthrow their hegemony masters. Their uprising had inspired rebellions on 16 other worlds, creating a cascade of liberation that the hegemony still couldn't stop. "Permission granted," she replied, "and tell them President Kim will be honored to accept their gift personally." In the station's main assembly hall, President Hyun-woo Kim addressed representatives from species that had never been allowed to speak freely before. The universal translator made it possible for beings with completely different languages and communication methods to understand each other perfectly. "Friends and allies," President Kim began, 1 year ago, humanity stood alone against an empire that had conquered most of our local galaxy. Today, that same empire controls less than half of its former territory, and its grip weakens every day. The assembled delegates, and some humanoid, some completely alien, responded with their species' various expressions of approval. Clicks, whistles, harmonic tones, and even patterns of colored light filled the hall. Dr. Jamin Park, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Liberation Council, presented the latest intelligence reports. The news was encouraging but sobering. "The hegemony still controls approximately 3,000 star systems," he announced. "However, active rebellions are now ongoing in over 600 of those systems. Their military forces are stretched thin trying to maintain control." Engineer Yujin Bayek had spent the past year sharing human technology with their new allies. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. "The Velthari have successfully adapted our shield penetration technology to their plasma weapons," she reported. "Last week, they liberated the entire Andromeda sector using modified human battle tactics. The Keth-Noran resistance has used our stealth technology to destroy 3 major hegemony fleet bases. But the most significant changes were happening within the hegemony itself. Sub-Commander Thexnil, now calling himself a conscience keeper, had established safe havens for hegemony military personnel who refused to participate in the Empire's crimes. We estimate that nearly 40% of the hegemony's military forces have either defected or are refusing orders, reported Strategic Communications Director Woojin Ryu. The message continues to spread throughout their space, reaching new worlds every day. The message had evolved far beyond its original purpose. What started as propaganda warfare had become a revolutionary manifesto, carrying not just information about hegemony crimes, but also blueprints for building free societies. It included everything from democratic government structures to sustainable technology designs. Dr. Haiwan Seo's quantum communication network had become the backbone of the galactic resistance movement. Instant communication across interstellar distances allowed formerly isolated species to coordinate their liberation efforts. "We now have quantum relays in over 800 star systems," she announced. "Any species can request support from the Liberation Council and receive help within hours instead of years." But perhaps the most remarkable development was the transformation of former hegemony worlds. The planet Zirion Prime had been a military production center, churning out weapons for conquest. Now it produced medical supplies and food for refugee camps throughout the galaxy. General Sung-Ho Nam, now commander of the Liberation Defense Force, presented the military situation. "Hegemony fleet strength has dropped by 60% in the past year," he reported. "Most of their remaining ships are tied down trying to suppress rebellions. They simply don't have the forces to launch major offensive operations anymore." The general's report included analysis of the hegemony's new tactics, faced with species that fought like humans, attacking aggressively and willing to sacrifice everything for freedom. The Empire's traditional military doctrine had collapsed. "They're learning to fear us," General Nam concluded. "For the first time in their history, hegemony commanders are hesitating to attack because they don't know what surprises await them." Colonel Insu Jiang had spent the year training resistance fighters from dozens of species. His methods were based on human guerrilla warfare techniques, adapted for different planetary environments and alien physiologies. "We've graduated over 50,000 resistance fighters from the training program," he reported. "They returned to their homeworlds with knowledge of human tactics and access to our weapon designs. Each one becomes a teacher for hundreds more." Dr. Yoon Ji-han presented the most ambitious project yet undertaken by the Liberation Council. Project Lighthouse was building a network of heavily defended stations throughout liberated space, each one capable of supporting refugee populations and serving as a base for further liberation efforts. "We now have 17 lighthouse stations operational," she announced. "Each one can support up to 10 million refugees and has the industrial capacity to build ships and weapons for the liberation fleets." But the real victory was cultural, not military. Species that had been slaves for generations were rediscovering their own histories and traditions. The Zephyrian people had spent 3 centuries as forced laborers in hegemony mines. Now they were building cities on their homeworld again, creating art and music that had been forbidden under alien rule. President Kim concluded the assembly with, "Humanity's pledge to the galaxy. We will not rest until every being in this galaxy has the chance to live free," he declared. "We will share our technology, our knowledge, and our experience with anyone who seeks liberation from tyranny." As the assembly ended, Admiral Lee received a priority message from Earth's deep space monitoring stations. A smile crossed her face as she read the report. Captain Tae Ho-an, who had survived his seemingly suicidal attack on the hegemony fleet, approached her with curiosity. "Good news, Admiral?" "The best possible news," she replied. "Our colony ships have made contact with 3 previously unknown species in the Outer Rim. All 3 have agreed to join the Liberation Council. The Human Colony Project had been humanity's insurance policy against extinction. 15 fleets carrying 10,000 volunteers each had left Earth before the war began. Now those colonies were becoming centers of liberation in unexplored regions of the galaxy." In the station's memorial hall, a simple plaque honored the human crews who had sacrificed their lives in the Battle of Sol. Their names were engraved in every language spoken by the Liberation Council's member species. But the most important words were written in simple English. They chose to fight so that others could be free. Commander Bo Young Lim's name was at the top of the list, along with those of every crew member who had executed Protocol Zero. Their sacrifice had shown the galaxy that some things were worth dying for. Sub-Commander Thexanil arrived at the station for his first face-to-face meeting with human leaders. The former hegemony officer had become a symbol of redemption, proof that even those who had served the Empire could choose a different path. "President Kim," he said through the universal translator, "my people owe humanity a debt that cannot be repaid. You showed us that we had become the monsters we once feared." President Kim's response was simple and direct. "You don't owe us anything, Sub-Commander. You've already repaid that debt by choosing to fight for what's right. As the diplomatic meetings continued, Admiral Lee returned to the observation deck to watch the stars. Somewhere out there, former slaves were building new cities. Resistance fighters were planning their next operations. And the galactic hegemony was learning what humanity had always known, that freedom cannot be conquered, only chosen. The war wasn't over. It might take decades to fully liberate all the hegemony's former subjects. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. Humanity had shown the galaxy how to fight back. And now there was no stopping the wave of liberation sweeping across the stars. Fleet Admiral Vexitar, stripped of his rank and imprisoned on a hegemony penal world, spent his days watching news reports of his empire's collapse. The species he had once dismissed as primitive had taught the galaxy the most important lesson in history, that any being willing to fight for freedom could never truly be conquered. His final report to the hegemony high command before his capture, Vextar had written a warning that his superiors refused to believe. We did not lose to superior technology or greater numbers. We lost to an idea, and ideas once released cannot be stopped. The galaxy was free, and it was only the beginning.